They thought $500 would scare him. They thought a piece of paper with a signature and a stamp could put him in his place. They thought if they told him, "You can't fish here," he'd pack up his rod and walk away. But instead of folding, instead of paying that fine, instead of staying quiet, he turned the whole game upside down. The same lake they said he couldn't touch, he bought it, he owned it. And the man who fined him, the one who stood over him with that smug look and that clipboard, suddenly had to ask for his permission just to set foot near the water. And the look on that man's face when he realized the power had flipped, that's the part you won't forget. HOAs, homeowners associations. If you know, you know. These little neighborhood governments that think they run everything. They tell you what color you can paint your house. They fine you for letting your grass grow an inch too high. They put letters on your door for having the wrong kind of car in your driveway. But the thing about HOAs is this. Once you're under one, you feel trapped. Because they've got the rules, they've got the lawyers, and they've got the time to wear you down until you either give up or pay up. And when race comes into the picture, when you're a black man living in a neighborhood where you already stand out, those rules feel heavier, because they don't always come down equal. Some people get warnings, others get fines. Some people are neighbors, others are outsiders. That's the world Marcus was living in. It was supposed to be a peaceful day. The kind of day where the world feels slow, where the water's calm and you just want to breathe. Marcus loved fishing. It wasn't about the fish. It wasn't about showing off what he caught. Fishing was therapy. It was silence. It was sitting still in a world that never stopped moving. That lake near his house, that was his spot. He lived in the neighborhood. He paid his dues. He had every reason to believe he had a right to be there. So he walked down to the shore, rod in hand. The air was warm, the sky was fatting orange, and when his line hit the water, he felt that peace wash over him. But peace doesn't last long when someone doesn't want you there. He heard footsteps, slow, sharp, and when he turned, there he was, the HOA president, clipboard in one hand. That fake smile people wear when they're about to tell you something you don't want to hear. "Sir, you can't fish here," he said, not even making eye contact. "This is unauthorized use of community property." Marcus blinked. "I live here." The man shrugged. "Rules are rules." And just like that, he handed him the paper. A fine, $500. Not for breaking the law, not for causing trouble, just for fishing. Marcus looked at the fine in his hand and felt the heat rising in his chest, because he knew what this was. He'd seen neighbors, white neighbors, cast their lines in that same water without anyone stopping them. No fines, no clipboards, no problem. But when he did it, suddenly it was a violation. Suddenly it was unauthorized. Suddenly it was a $500 mistake. And that's when Marcus decided he wasn't paying. He wasn't walking away. If they wanted to play games, he'd play too, but on a whole different level. Fighting an HOA is like wrestling with a snake. They twist, they coil, and by the time you think you've got them, they've got you. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He started asking questions. Who really owned the lake? Who had the right to say who could and couldn't fish there? The HOA acted like they owned it. They fined people like they owned it. But acting like you own something and actually owning it are two different things. So Marcus dug deeper. He went to the county office. He pulled up deeds. He looked through property maps. And then he found it. The HOA didn't own the lake. On paper, the lake was separate, its own piece of property, not tied to the HOA at all. And here's the kicker, it was up for sale. Now imagine being Marcus in that moment. You've got a $500 fine in your hand. They told you you didn't belong. They tried to box you out. And then you find out the whole thing, the very water they tried to keep you from, could be yours. Marcus didn't hesitate. He started making calls. He sat down with a realtor. He ran the numbers. He looked at the papers. And then he did it. He bought the lake. The same man they fined for fishing now owned the entire body of water. The HOA couldn't fine him anymore. They couldn't tell him where to fish. They couldn't tell him anything. In fact, the power flipped completely. Now, Marcus had the right to say who could and couldn't set foot near that lake. And when the HOA president found out, oh, the silence was loud. But before we get there, let's pause, because this story isn't just about Marcus, it's about history. For generations, black people in America have been told, you don't belong here. From pools to parks to neighborhoods, the rules were always written to keep us out. Even when the signs came down, the attitude stayed. The gatekeeping didn't end. It just changed form. Marcus's story, it's the same story, just modernized. Same message, different wrapping. And that's why his move was so powerful, because he didn't just fight for access. He claimed ownership, and ownership changes everything. And if you think that was bold, wait until you hear what happened when the HOA president tried to walk down to that lake again. Click here, you won't believe it. It was a few weeks later. The fine was still fresh in Marcus's memory. The HOA president thought he'd won. He thought Marcus had backed off. So he did what he always did, walked down to the lake with his clipboard, ready to police somebody, ready to act like he was king of the water. But this time, something stopped him. There was a sign. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. And at the bottom, Marcus's name. The president froze. The clipboard hung in his hand. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding the power. Marcus was already there, sitting by the water, fishing rod in hand, calm, peaceful. But when their eyes met, the message was clear: the rules have changed. No words needed, no shouting, no drama, just a simple reality. The same man you tried to find now owns the lake you wanted to control. And that's the kind of justice you can't put a price on. Was it extreme? Maybe. Buying an entire lake just to prove a point isn't what most people would do. But here's the thing. Paying the fine would have been easy. Fighting in court would have been draining. Ignoring it would have meant letting them win. But owning the lake, that was permanent. That was undeniable. Marcus showed what happens when you stop asking for permission. When you stop playing by rules designed to box you in. When you decide, if you're going to tell me I don't belong, then I'll own the ground you're standing on. This wasn't about revenge. It was about flipping the script. It was about turning "you don't belong" into "this is mine." And that's why his story matters, because for too long the fight has been about access, but the real fight, it's always been about ownership. But here, where things get interesting. Because once Marcus owned that lake, the story didn't end. That's actually where it really began. Think about it. The HOA president had built his whole identity on being the man in charge, the rule enforcer, the clipboard king. He wasn't just protecting property values, he was protecting power. And in one signature, in one deal, Marcus stripped that power away. And you know, people like that don't take humiliation quietly. At the next HOA meeting, whispers were flying. Some neighbors were confused. Some were angry. Some were low-key amused. Imagine sitting there, sipping your coffee, hearing that the guy the president fined now owned the very lake he tried to control. The tension in that room was thick. The president tried to brush it off, acting like it wasn't a big deal. He cleared his throat, tapped his clipboard, and moved on to the next agenda item. But everyone saw it. His face was red. His pride was cracked. His authority didn't feel the same. Because now, every time he walked past Marcus, every time he looked toward that lake, he had to swallow the fact that he lost. Not in court. Not in some long debate. He lost because Marcus played a smarter game. And Marcus, he wasn't loud about it. He didn't stand up at meetings to gloat. He didn't rub it in anyone's face. He didn't need to. The lake spoke for itself. Neighbors started noticing the shift. Some who had stayed quiet before started nodding at Marcus when they saw him. Some even came up to him and said, "Man, I can't believe you pulled that off." Others whispered, "You know, I always hated how he ran this place anyway." That's the thing about power. Once someone stands up to it, once someone shows it's not untouchable, the whole community sees the cracks. And here's the wildest part. A few weeks later, Marcus was sitting by the lake, lying in the water, enjoying the peace that was finally his, and one of the same neighbors who used to give him side eyes walked up. This man, older, white, the kind who'd never said much more than a polite hello, stood there for a second before finally asking, "Do you mind if I fish here with you?" Marcus looked up at him. He could have said no. He could have turned him away the same way the HOA president tried to turn him away. He could have used his ownership as a weapon. But he didn't. He shrugged, pointed at the water, and said, "Go ahead, just respect it." And in that moment the power flipped again. Not just because Marcus owned the lake, but because he showed what real ownership looks like. Ownership isn't just about exclusion. It's about choice, about setting the tone, about deciding what the space means. Marcus chose peace. But don't get it twisted, that didn't mean the HOA president gave up. Oh no. He tried to find loopholes. He called county offices. He tried to argue at board meetings. He wanted to believe there had to be some rule, some technicality, some hidden clause that could give him back control. But every door he knocked on told him the same thing. The lake was Marcus's. End of story. And here's what that did to him. It humbled him. He wasn't strutting through the neighborhood the same way anymore. He wasn't as quick to pull out his clipboard. He started shrinking in his own role. Because once the mask of power slips, it's hard to put it back on. Meanwhile, Marcus kept fishing. Morning, evening, weekends. Not because he needed to prove anything anymore, but because it was his peace, his sanctuary, his victory made real. And with every cast of his line, he was sending a silent message. This is what happens when you stop playing by their rules. Now here's the part people don't talk about enough. When Marcus told his story outside the neighborhood, to friends, to family, to people online, the reaction was huge. Some laughed, some cheered, some said, "Man, that's petty genius." But others felt something deeper, because for Black folks especially, this story wasn't just about a lake. It was about all the times we've been told you can't. You can't live here, you can't swim here, you can't sit here, you can't have this. Marcus didn't just take back a lake, he took back the narrative. He showed that ownership is the ultimate checkmate. And that's what hit people the hardest. Imagine the next generation hearing this story, a kid asking his father, "Why do you fish here so much?" And the father smiling, saying, "Because they told me I couldn't, and now it's ours." That's legacy. That's bigger than a fine. That's bigger than a fight with an HOA. That's rewriting the story for everyone who comes after. And if you think that's powerful, wait until you hear what happened when Marcus started using his ownership not just for himself, but for the community. Because once you've got power, the question becomes, what do you do with it? And Marcus had an answer that surprised everyone. If that story gave you chills, hit subscribe. The next one will blow your mind.